What is the most busted ability in Bullet Echo right now? And why are a lot of the newer abilities so frustrating? That's what I'm going to try to find out. I will be judging them on 5 different metrics: team play, defensive play, offensive play, utility, which will be based on their cooldowns and the overall number of situations and encounters that this ability will be good in, and lastly, ease of use. Starting off with what I would consider to be a pretty well balanced ability: Scan. It highlights all enemies within a range of 1000 for 3 seconds, and enemies take plus 35% damage when highlighted. And it has great synergy with a lot of other hero abilities. However, it can also be a negative because if an enemy team is outside that 1000 range, you won't know where they are, but now they can see where you just scanned from and know where you are. And there's a good chance you could get ambushed. And another thing I like about Scan is its charge regeneration time is much longer than its cooldown, which makes it so you actually care about picking up the ability packs scattered across the map, which for most characters you just completely ignore. So I would have to put this ability in A tier. Grenades have a super fast cooldown, so you're able to spam them, which is pretty helpful to control a zone to prevent enemies from coming from that direction. And it's great to be able to destroy drones after getting a kill without having to get close. It's pretty good at dealing with lower health characters, but when going against high health and armor characters, it takes so many grenades to hit right on top of the enemy to take them out. And it does have some negatives where it's pretty easy to accidentally kill a teammate if you aren't careful. So overall, I would say grenades are pretty weak. In most cases, there's a lot of ways your enemies can react and counter, which I don't see as a bad thing. In most situations and encounters, you should be able to do something to evade or counter an ability, which, as I'll go over later, is not the case with a lot of newer abilities. So grenades get a C tier. Going on to another explosive ability, rockets, which are kind of similar to grenades except they fly faster, further, and explode on contact with objects. They do have some utility to destroy shields and force fields, but are quite challenging to aim accurately at long distances, and struggle with a lot of the same things that grenades do. It is extremely satisfying when you land a rocket onto someone, but unless they are a hero that has lower health, you aren't going to get the kill. I could see them being better if the 2 heroes that have rockets, Smog and Dog, had more vision range, but as it is, I can't rate it higher than a D tier when compared to other abilities. The shield is overall just a solid ability. It has the potential to completely block bullets if you position yourself correctly, but it does have drawbacks where you move slower when it's active, and the shield area is pretty small, so if your enemies are spread out, it's easy to get flanked. And if somebody gets right on top of you, it's not going to block their bullets. B+ tier. Force Field is an amazing ability, and I would argue it's actually a little bit too amazing. Similar to the shield, it blocks bullets, but it's much wider and does not move with your hero, but stays in place, making it a little bit more helpful for the team. And if any part of an enemy enters the force field, they move super slow and lose the ability to shoot. I'm probably a little biased because I love Satoshi so much, but this earned an A+ tier. The turret used to be one of the worst abilities in the game before they added a shield to the front of it. Now it's actually a pretty solid ability. With the addition of the shield, it's quite versatile, allowing you to either control an entrance into a room, or you can use it as a meat shield by standing on top of it to help soak up damage. But it can be destroyed pretty easily by an enemy just moving to the side and taking it out, and its cooldown and regeneration time are a little bit on the longer side of abilities. D tier. Thermal lets you see through walls and allows your firing cone to go through walls. So what can I say? It's just a good ability. You're able to shoot through a wall, and the bad guys aren't able to shoot back at you unless they find a way to get a line of sight. But as long as they know where you are, it isn't too challenging for them to just stay out of your range until your ability ends, because while you have your thermal active, you move super slow, so they don't have to worry about you getting much closer. And if you don't get a kill while your thermal's active, you won't get the +1 ability charge. So you have to wait 27 seconds or find an ability pack before you can use it again. A- tier. Breakaway ability allows you to jump backwards and over walls. One of the best parts of this ability isn't really the leaping back, but when you use it, you get a +35% movement speed and 50 firing range. This is one of those abilities that requires lots of skill doing flick shots and short jumps for the speed boost. So at top level play, probably a B tier, but for the plebs, me included, probably only like a C tier. Invisibility. This is an ability that I've always hated. Just because if you don't know there's an invis character around, there's really nothing you can do to counter it. He just runs up behind you, disables invis, and you have half a second to react before they start shooting you. Oh wait, Never mind, they've recently reduced the cooldown before they can shoot after exiting Invisibility from 0.5 seconds to 0.3 seconds in case it wasn't bad enough before. It would be one thing if you had a way of knowing if there was a ghost or stalker coming, but to go alongside with Invisibility, they also gave those heroes tons of reduced running loudness, so you can't even hear them until they're right on top of you. I'm not saying it's a broken ability in terms of being able to completely wipe out a team, although it can be in certain situations. Just that if you happen to be unlucky enough to come across a ghost or stalker, you just die with most characters unless you have a huge health pool. A- tier. Suppression allows Bertha to free fire for a few seconds without having to have the enemy in her firing cone, and gives her plus bullet penetration, allowing for better travel through walls. It's a good ability, but if you don't have a cohesive team to support you, you might be in trouble because the enemies are able to see and hear right where you're shooting from, and are able to time their attacks right as you're reloading. And on maps with thicker walls, it becomes less useful as enemies can just stand behind a big wall, and your bullets will either do very little damage or get blocked entirely. Probably a B+ tier if you have a Raven or a Cyclops on your team, but otherwise C+. Blink ability is similar to Breakaway, but instead of leaping backwards, you leap forward into battle and deal a little bit of damage where you land. You don't get the movement speed boost and firing range boost like Breakaway, but it's much simpler to use. It's a great defensive ability to get out of sticky situation and can be good in attacking. You just have to be careful not to jump right into the middle of an enemy team, or you're done. C+ tier. Rain of Arrows calls down a small ring of arrows that deals a decent amount of damage, and is great at taking out like camping teams like Satoshi or Blot, but when dealing with fast moving enemies, it's really not that great, and it's kind of challenging to aim. That, and it does have a somewhat long cooldown and recharge, so I'm going to have to put this ability into C tier. Ball of Light disables all abilities it touches and prevents ability usage while inside of it. You and your teammates also gain a 25% damage reduction and plus 25% fire rate while in the ball, and enemies' fire rate is reduced by 25%. It's really nice when you know that there's a hero with an annoying ability around like Ghost or some of the other heroes we'll be getting to in a bit, because you can throw this down and stay inside of it without having to worry about some bozos abilitying you to death. But depending on the heroes you have on your team, it can be kind of counter synergistic by accidentally disabling your team's abilities or preventing someone like Angel from charging in with their shield. And when grenades come in contact with it, they instantly explode, so depending on the location of it, it can lead you susceptible to grenade spam if you're standing on top of it. B- tier. Fire Hunter is a fire grenade that ignites on contact with walls and heroes, and a fire ring slowly spreads outwards. Any hero inside the fire will have their movement speed reduced and take quite a bit of damage per second. With this long duration and wide area, it's excellent for controlling enemies' movement, especially when the ring of fire is expanding and you trap them in a building and force them to choose between the ring of fire and your Fire Hunter ability. Overall, it's better than grenades in most situations, so B tier. Portal Gun is amazing for team play, especially in larger team modes like Sabotage and Squad vs. Squad, letting you teleport you and your entire team through walls for a quick attack. And when Alice enters the portal, she gains a massive 40% movement speed, making her pretty much the fastest hero in the game. When you create two portals in the same spot, enemies on the other side of the portal get their fire rate and movement speed reduced to help keep you alive when rushing through the portal. You do have to be careful though not to run through portals willy-nilly, because you are only able to see a little ways around the portal, so it can be trapped. And enemies are also able to use your portals, so that's something to be mindful of. A tier. Shadow Step is an interesting one for me because when I try to use it, occasionally I can do really good, but most of the time I just get one kill and die. But I see a lot of gamers who can team wipe with it, so it definitely has a pretty high skill gap. Otherwise, it's an extremely versatile ability, allowing you to squeeze through small gaps, giving you a short movement speed boost, and making you invincible while the animation is playing. It's also great in both defensive play and offensive play, allowing you to quickly exit an enemy attack or quickly dash back and forth by enemies, making it hard for them to lock onto you. And with lower health enemies, the damage you deal with multiple Shadow Steps may be enough to kill them by itself. We have our first S tier. And this is the point in the abilities where I feel like things really started to go wrong. Freezing Mine is one of my least favorite abilities, not because I necessarily think it's OP, but because you have to be so close to it before it becomes visible, so most of the time you just run directly into it and get frozen. And the freeze effect is extremely annoying where you're not able to use abilities, and you move as slow as a snail for 4.5 seconds. They're basically just a sitting duck out in the open without really anything you can do. It definitely still has its downsides because it can easily be destroyed with explosive damage, and it is stationary, so if you're on the outside of the map and the ring of fire is expanding, it won't be as helpful because it'll quickly go out of bounds. B tier. Rampage I love as an idea, turning into a beefy boy, charging in, and when you're hitting an enemy, having it launch them sounds awesome. But in practice, it falls short for me. It has a similar debuff as Freezing Mine, but in addition to not being able to use abilities and having your movement speed significantly reduced, you are also not able to shoot. Granted, the duration is only 1.6 seconds, but that's still 1.6 seconds when there's basically nothing you can do when you're hit by Rampage. And I feel like the direct damage you're dealt when you're hit by it is way too much, and it's able to one-tap many of the lower health characters. I guess my biggest problem with it is with so many characters, there's nothing you can do when you see a Ramsey running towards you. Your best bet is to just try and run away and hope for the best. The ability isn't necessarily overpowered, because if you try to run into a full team solo, you will likely get one kill then die. And you can accidentally stun your teammates if they're by the hero you just headbutted, so B tier. Burrow is yet another ability that has an annoying effect when you're hit by it, so that you can't shoot for 1.5 seconds. I don't know why all of the newest heroes have to hard disable a basic action, but it's really frustrating. Burrow is great for both defensive and offensive play, allowing you to quickly burrow in and out of battle and become untargetable for 4 seconds, except from explosion damage, which will cause you to surface. It's not the kind of ability where you're going to surface right into the middle of an enemy team and solo wipe them out, but my problem is that, similar to Ramsey's ability, in most 1v1 situations the other character does not have a counter besides just trying to run away. And if you're a slower character, that really isn't an option. Really the only heroes that have a hard counter to this ability are Blot and Satoshi when they throw a force field up. And there's a handful of other abilities that you may win in a duel, but most of the time you just escape the fight without dying. And it's not even an ability that requires a ton of skill, you just have to avoid big groups of enemies and target the outliers. A+ tier. And the final ability, as of the making of this video, is Force Bomb, which, no surprise, has a stun that reduces your movement speed, and you can't use abilities or shoot. Thankfully, it's only for 0.7 seconds, but by now you know how I feel about that. Other than the stun, I love this ability. With all the cool movement tech you can perform by launching yourselves over walls to get a flank on an enemy, or firing a rocket into an enemy team to launch one away from the others and separate them to make them easy pickings. Right now I'd say it's probably a little bit overtuned because they want people to buy the star pass to unlock her, so probably A+ tier here. Now I have not used this hero yet, so I'm not totally certain if this is how it actually is. I'm just basing this off of the games I played with teammates who had her and playing against her. So here are the final rankings. It's important to keep in mind that there's more to a hero than just the ability. So for some of these heroes, they may be a little bit underpowered or overpowered, but it might equal out when you compare the weapon and all the other strengths of and abilities of the hero. With that in mind, what are some ways that they could balance some of these abilities to help buff some heroes that may need some help and nerf some heroes that are a little too good? Starting off with some buffs, for rockets, an indirect way that they could potentially help them out would be to increase the vision range of Doc and Smog, allowing them to see further and go for longer range rocket shots. Because even if you equip all the gears with plus vision range, it's still pretty limited compared to the full range of the rocket. They could also add a little more damage when you get a direct hit from a rocket because of how hard it can be to aim. For grenades, I feel like their damage and explosion time are pretty well balanced, but a good way to buff them would be to give them a debuff to enemies whenever they take grenade damage. The debuff could be where they take plus 20% damage for a few seconds, or have their movement speed reduced by a little bit for a few seconds. For the nerfs, starting with Shadow Step, this is a little bit of a harder one to balance because it's really only overpowered at higher levels of the game. Potentially they could add a slight delay before she can shoot after dashing, or give a longer replenishment time so that she has to be more mindful of when you use the ability. For Burrow, it would be nice if it was more visible if there was a molly coming your way, and instead of flat out disabling your ability to shoot, at least make it something like negative 80% attack speed, so at least you can try to fight back. Force Bomb, I feel like the damage should be reduced to separate it more from rockets and make it more about utility. And Twinkle, aka P's fourth ability, passive, gives negative 80% explosion damage, should be reduced because as it is when she launches herself, she loses basically no health, so there's no consequence to just launching yourself willy-nilly. Instead of Force Field being a two-sided shield that only you can shoot through, I think it would be cool if you can only shoot through one side of it, and if enemies come through the side that you laid it down at, they're actually able to shoot through it as well, to make it a little bit more two-sided and really make you want to defend your position and not let enemies use your own shield. Rampage, I wish they would lean more into the tanky side and make it so he still launches enemies when he rams them, but make him deal much less damage on collision and not stun the enemies. But compensate him with a buff when he rams someone so he gets something like plus 60% max health for 8 seconds and restores allies within a range of something like 500 health to make him more of a team player. For Frozen Mind, make it so they are visible from a much farther range, which would encourage you to try to hide them behind obstacles. And to make up for this, you could increase their area of effect. And 4.5 seconds of negative 80% movement speed and no abilities is way too long, so I would like it if they made it negative 50% movement speed. And I'm not sure how hard it would be to do this, but instead of disabling abilities altogether, if they could make it so that the ability use time was increased to something like plus 75%, that would be pretty cool. And if this was too much of a nerf, they could add some flat damage to the mine or make it so frozen enemies take plus 30% damage or something. And lastly, invisibility. Either make the heroes louder or make them louder when they have invisibility active, so they have to at least be careful not to let you see their footsteps. Also, increasing the recharge time of invisibility could go a long way. It would also be nice if they reverted the 0.3 second time that you can't shoot back to 0.5 seconds. And that's about it. I'm curious to hear your guys' thoughts, especially on the newer abilities, to know if I'm the only one who doesn't like how they completely stun you. There's definitely some subjectiveness to this list, and if you were to judge these abilities on different metrics, you would likely get different results.